Winter is not over. This is the Tuesday edition of the Carolina Weather Video here for this 23rd day of February. We start off with the radar. This is a peek of our News 14 Carolina Interactive Radar. There's a link to that on my blog, as well as, of course, from news14.com. Neat tool there. Anyway, showing you snow moving through much of Texas this morning. That is indeed associated with our next system. Now, it's relatively mild still today. Most of us were only down toward the low 40s this morning, highs mid to upper 50s, maybe even some low 60s in some spots. We're starting off the day with a lot of fog across the region. Again, relatively mild, nothing too cold. But another pretty good shot of cold air gearing up to drop southeastward, and beginning tomorrow, we're going to be plunged back into a much colder pattern. You can see the charge of that colder air today in the northern plains, in the Great Lakes region. This is the 6C run of the GFS. Again, today a fairly mild day, probably some peaks of sun trying to work in this afternoon. The more sun you see, the milder you'll be today. Also notice there is that precipitation back in Texas. A lot of that along and north of I-20 is in the form of snow, and even south of I-20 in many instances in Texas. Now, a bit of a lull in the precip coming tonight, but still maybe enough to squeeze out a few snowflakes in Mississippi and Alabama, but then the chance for snow begins to pick back up again as we get into the day tomorrow, beginning late tonight, and then certainly as we get into the day tomorrow from Georgia into the Carolinas. And it looks pretty likely that we're going to see a period of wet snow in a lot of places tomorrow. Maybe beginning as a period of rain in some spots the farther east and south you go, but I think a lot of us from I-85, roughly, points north and west, are going to see mainly wet snow with this system as it rolls on through. So that's 1 p.m. tomorrow. There's the precip between 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. tomorrow as the system pulls away. Now, this is not going to be a huge event. Temperatures should be above freezing for pretty much the entirety of the event at the surface. So I don't think we're going to have any major road problems. But I do think there could be enough snow for some accumulation on the grassy areas and the elevated surfaces. This is my rough initial sort of accumulation outline here. And I'll say anyone, Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, up into the mountains, fair game for at least a dusting of slushy, wet snow accumulation on the grass. And there'll probably be a spot, a strip in there somewhere where an inch or two, a slushy snow accumulation, mainly on the grassy surfaces, occurs tomorrow. Exactly where that sets up, still pretty tough to tell. But again, a lot of us could certainly get some snow on the ground tomorrow. This is not going to be a huge event. I think the roads should largely be just wet with any snow that occurs due to actual ground surface temperatures being above freezing. But certainly some light snow accumulation is a possibility tomorrow. Again, winter's not over, and this is not the last winter weather potential. Let's go out behind the system to Thursday. Boy, Thursday, it's going to be cold. We're looking at gusty winds out of the northwest Thursday. Temperatures probably struggling to make it into the low 40s despite a lot of sunshine Thursday. Friday, a bit of a lull, and then here comes this next system. Most of the modeling has had this suppressed well off to our south, but now the GFS has been creeping this farther northward now with each passing run, and it's far enough now on the 6C run that, taken verbatim, that's a period of some light snow, North Georgia into South Carolina and extreme southern North Carolina as we go into Saturday morning. We'll see. I've kept the Saturday forecast dry for the time being, but if we see that northward shift in the modeling continuing, might have a little bit more in the way of some very light snow by Saturday morning. Again, that system looks relatively minor as well. But then there's been really, for a while, remarkable consistency in there being a very significant system early next week, between March 1st and March 3rd, between Monday and Wednesday of next week. This is the 6Z run of the GFS, low pressure down to the Gulf of Mexico that then moves off into the western Atlantic, spreads some snow into much of the Tennessee Valley into the Carolinas. The 0Z run really cranked this low along the coast, and that put down heavy snow in much of the Carolinas. The Canadian took a perfect track for snow in the Carolinas. This is a look at the Canadian from 7 p.m., a valid 7 p.m. next Tuesday. The European has a powerhouse low also crossing Florida. Now, a lot of the precip on the European is off to the south of North Carolina on this run, but The players are on the field, and it's really, again, fairly remarkable agreement amongst a lot of the computer models that early next week there's going to be a big system affect the southeastern part of the country. Now, exactly the track it takes and how strong the low will be, that's yet to be resolved, but I think there is the potential for some of us to see maybe a decent snow event early next week somewhere across the region, so we'll see. Again, winter is far from over. All right, that's it for today's edition of the Carolina Weather Video. Quick note here, doing some upgrades and some alterations to the blog, so you might see some weirdness with the blog and some odd behavior over the next day or so until I get all that taken care of. But I hope to have that done pretty soon, and it should be an improvement when it's done. All right, that's it for today's edition of the Carolina Weather Video. Have a great Tuesday, and God bless.